instead of your own concepts as your God, then that guiding light that shines on you, guides you into much better ways, into much resourceful ways, into happiness, into better habits. If you have eating issues, your eating issues will vanish because you'll be being fed essentially by the Spirit. You'll have joy, happiness, contentment, peace, and you won't need to reach for food, drinks, alcohol, drugs, overeating, cigarettes, depression, worry, anxiety. Those things will slowly evaporate from your life as you raise in consciousness and grow in your awareness of the Father Spirit that is there now. Hi there, this is Mark, and thank you for tuning in to the video. And this video is on the subject of consciousness. Now, consciousness is something that I talk about, but it's really only a word, okay? It's really only a word, and it can be interpreted differently. You know, obviously we all know, hopefully, that a word could be interpreted completely differently by one person and another person. This is why there's so many arguments amongst people who read the Bible. They both read the exact same thing. They come to different conclusions, and then they call their conclusions of what they read the truth, because they focus on the Bible. They say that's what the Bible says, and they try and use the weight of the Bible. They try and say, okay, the Bible says this, but no, it's not the Bible saying it. It's their interpretation of what the Bible says. And that's what people need to realize. I'm very conscious of this, so this is why I really need to clear out this word. It's a key word. Obviously, my channel is called Raising Consciousness. So you need to understand what I mean by consciousness. And through this, you also can learn a lot, because this is going to be a two-part video series where I'm going to talk about what consciousness is, what I mean in the context I use it, and then I'm going to teach you in part two how to raise your consciousness, like techniques and methods to raise your consciousness. Okay, so what do I mean by consciousness? What do I mean? Well, it's very key. It's almost like you have to say what you don't mean sometimes, because that leads to what you mean. So, and you'll also have to go to extremes. So let me go to an extreme here. The lowest extreme of consciousness in the context in which I mean it is that someone who's maybe asleep, sleeping, and then somebody who's in a coma. That would be what I consider the lowest level of consciousness. Okay? Now, it's a spiritual term, and you can confuse it you could say, well, so when someone's awake, that's a different level of consciousness? No, because people can be physically awake walking around, but they can be consciously asleep. Okay? But I'm using extremes to make the point. So the lowest level would be someone who's asleep, and the highest level would be someone like Jesus, who walked in such a high level of consciousness that in that level of consciousness they were connected with the creating or the creative originating source, which is often called God. Now, I kind of it's very strange. People would say, well, don't you believe in God? And I would say, well, what do you mean by God? You see, and there we are back to that problem again. One person's definition of God is completely different to another person's definition of God. Therefore, I'm at pains to stay away from the definition God, because it's very non-descriptive. It's so open. Okay, you see, when you say God to an atheist, they say the imaginary man in the sky. You say God to one type of Christian, they say, you know, the person who punishes sinners. You say it to one Christian, you know, he's the loving God, so on and so forth. Do you see the problem? So when I say the originating spirit, you can translate that to God if you like. I'd rather you kind of just listen rather than do mental translation, because that's the subject of this video, is to understand how the mind is working with regards to consciousness. So back to the point. See, I have to kind of go off sometimes and come back to the point because I have to qualify what I mean. Words are so difficult. Words are a very weak form of communication. You can use them very well if you're articulate, but even then, you don't know how someone's receiving the word or how they're even interpreting it. So you can just do your best, and that's what I'm trying to do. Anyway, so consciousness is a description of levels. It's a description of levels. Now, what I'm proposing to you, in the context I mean it in my videos, is that there's a lower level of consciousness, and there's sub-levels within that lower level. Then there's a thick dividing line, and I'm actually going to do a video on my laptop with some graphics, and I may put that in the video here or at some point soon. I'm not sure how I'm going to edit this video yet because I'm just recording it, of course. But you'll see the graphic in a moment if this doesn't work for you. But anyway, there's a thick dividing line between a low level of consciousness and a higher level of consciousness. Now within that two divisions, there's also sub-levels. Now I don't want to complicate it, it just helps to visualize it. You know, I have to speak to you conceptually to awaken the non-conceptual. And that's the very strange thing about this. But the problem also with concepts is people live from concepts. And they're living from something which is unreliable. Because everyone knows that you can describe something to three people, and each of those people could come up with a different understanding of what you said. Okay? Therefore, clearly, the conceptual process in the human brain is unreliable. What I mean is, when I say that conceptualization is a lower form of consciousness, which is what I'm going to suggest to you, what I mean by that is I mean that if you live from your conceptualization as truth, then what you're doing is you're living from your own conceptualization, which is unreliable. And that, my friend, is what the Bible calls living from the knowledge of good and evil. Now, Adam and Eve, I'm going all over the place, sorry, but it's just natural. Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible, I believe to be a metaphoric story, personally. It doesn't matter if that story is true or it's a metaphor. It still works. The story still works for this purpose of what I'm saying. Okay, if it's a metaphor, it's the most amazing metaphor ever. If it's a true story, then it's still the most amazing illustration of what's happened to consciousness and humanity. Okay, so Adam and Eve, I believe, existed in a very high level of consciousness, and they literally walked with God. God walked with them in the cool of the day, as it says. And what I believe that represents is that they had a relationship directly with the originating spirit. Okay, they were also in paradise. According to the story, they were eternal. They didn't die. They had no sickness, no disease. Very high level of consciousness. Very high level of connection with the originating creator. Now think about this for a moment. If you're connected to the original creator, then of course you're so close to that. Not that that's distant, by the way. The creator, the creative spirit is everywhere, but we become blind to it. Okay? So what I believe is that Adam and Eve were in that high level of consciousness, definitely above the line, the thick line on the graphic. They were in that level of consciousness, and they fell. Instead of having God, let's say God is my hand here, instead of having God as their focus, essentially, this is a metaphorical visual I'm using. Of course, you're not supposed to be staring at God all day. God is just there everywhere and brings intuition to you and knowing and joy and happiness and peace and gentle, loving correction kind of thing. And I don't even like the word correction, baggage once again. But anyway, the concept of being singularly focused, I guess, on God as the source was where Adam and Eve started. Now what happened is the knowledge of good and evil, where they shall be as gods. Now remember, they had a God, but the knowledge of good and evil was they shall be as gods, knowing good from evil. Now what that is, that's the fall out of a connection with the Father into making their own mental conceptualization. In other words, they basically connected to their own minds, conceptual ideas about the world. So their worldview became their God, essentially. That's a good way to put it. Their worldview became their God. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's essentially what happened. Now, Adam and Eve fell from a high level of consciousness into a lower level of consciousness. Now, mankind has lived in that level of consciousness ever since, with very few people who seem to rise above the dividing line. Okay, now what I'm trying to get across the idea of here, without going into too much metaphoric language, is the idea of levels of consciousness. So now I call that the knowledge of good and evil mindset, or the knowledge of good and evil way of living. And I believe the whole world lives that way. The whole world lives from their conceptualization as their God and as their guide. Okay, the whole education system is designed to program you to live from your own conceptualization as your guide. Okay, we're trained to live from how we look, how we feel, how we think as our guide. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with being concerned with how you look and how you feel, but you don't live from that. It's the wrong way round. You've made how you think, how you feel into your God, okay, and therefore you are God unto yourself. So that's why, and that can be so flawed because the concepts can be wrong. So you can have trauma, you can have childhood trauma, so your concepts about people are wrong. You don't trust people. Do you see? It's like it's all internal. It's all internal. Whereas once you learn that there is a spirit and there is a higher level of consciousness that you need to be in to connect to that spirit, then it doesn't mean to say that you just fall apart and you live like humming, or you live sitting still in a room somewhere. All it means is you now, instead of using your own mental concepts as your guide, you have a partner. In a sense, you have a partner in life. It's almost like you have a Google. You have a spiritual Google, which is connecting to, that is guiding you spiritually through intuition and just knowing, and you have this peace. Now when that is your God, when God is your God, so to speak, instead of your own concepts as your God, then that guiding light that shines on you, guides you into much better ways, into much resourceful ways, into happiness, into better habits. If you have eating issues, your eating issues will vanish because you'll be being fed essentially by the spirit. You'll have joy, happiness, contentment, peace, and you won't need to reach for food, drinks, alcohol, drugs, overeating, cigarettes, depression, worry, anxiety. Those things will slowly evaporate from your life as you raise in consciousness and grow in your awareness of the Father Spirit that is there now. The originating Spirit, God, if you like, is there now, with you right now. If you can't sense that Spirit, if you can't feel that Spirit, then this is not to be critical. It just is what it is. It's because your consciousness level is too low at this moment in time. I don't mean that critical. It's not about being critical. It's just about saying, if someone's got a cold, you say you've got a cold. That's why you can't get out of bed. Or it's all I'm saying. It's like your consciousness level is too low to see God at the moment. Okay? And this is what my channel is all about, is raising your consciousness so you can see God. Now, I use the word see God because that's how the Bible says it. I prefer experience God. So you can experience God. Okay? Now, below this line, this thick line, there's a lot of carnality. I believe, so let's use some terms. The thick line I mentioned, the lower level of consciousness. There's many things that are below that line. So this is just a really short chart just to make the point that all the stuff I'm talking about as carnal, or as the knowledge of good and evil mindset, or the I think therefore I am mindset, all exists below this imaginary level, this imaginary red line. And you're caught up in here. Like, you're in here and everything's just stressful and you're worried and thinking and all this sort of stuff. And you can't solve any of these problems whilst you're below the line. Okay, the only way you can get past all these issues, this lower level of consciousness, all the religious demands and all these sorts of things. And I'm not saying that, you give up spirituality, but the only way is to move above into a high level of consciousness where you literally leave this stuff behind. This is no longer a problem because it's not in your consciousness. It's gone. It can't exist anymore. Worry can't exist because you just don't exist in that level of consciousness. Worry can only exist in a lower level of consciousness. But you exist higher. Therefore, worry can have no effect on you anymore. Fear can have no effect on you anymore. Stress can have no effect on you anymore. Because you're in a consciousness of peace, love, enlightenment, and courage. But these things only come as a manifestation out of where your consciousness is. So your level of consciousness dictates what you get, essentially. But also, when you change your level of consciousness, what you get also reinforces your level of consciousness. So when you're down in all the stress, the way out of stress is to raise your consciousness slowly. So you leave stress behind. But in the meantime, stress is a manifestation of being down here, but also stress keeps you down here at the same time as manifesting it. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. It keeps you in this lower level of consciousness. As you learn and slowly raise above, you come into a peaceful zone where you see you're above this now. You're above all these problems and you're observing all of it from a place of enlightenment, peace, joy, which are all manifestations of being in that higher level of consciousness. So it's a beautiful thing. And if I've said anything that doesn't make sense, please listen to the rest of this video, both videos 1 and 2. Thank you for listening. See you back at the video. The Bible uses the word carnal mind. I believe the carnal mind is everything below that line. So you could say, well, wait a minute. Religion's below the line. Yes, religion is below the line. Let me tell you why religion is below the line. Religion is below the line in a lower level of consciousness because religion lives from a concept about God. Listen carefully. They live from a concept about God, making themselves believe they have God. But they don't, because they're in a lower level of consciousness. And it says right in the Bible, the carnal mind cannot see God. So this is why you walk into a church or you look at religious people and they've got all the same problems as everyone else. And very often, if you look in many churches, I've seen a lot of churches, there's a lot of very overweight people in these churches. And that's because no one's teaching them. This is not critical. I'm not trying to be critical here. That's not where I'm coming from. No one's teaching them that to get past the anxiety and pain that exists in the lower level of consciousness that's making them reach for too much food. Okay, they reach for too much food, too much pleasure because they don't feel fulfilled. That's only happening because they're in a lower level of consciousness. And no one ever taught them, especially religion, because religion is a controlling organization that wants to keep you in the religion. Okay? And they claim they're trying to keep you with God. They're trying to keep you from backsliding. They're trying to keep you with Jesus. No, they're not. They're trying to keep you with the religion. Now, there's exceptions. There are some churches that have a good heart and they really do want you to be spiritual. But it's a difficult, they walk a tight, thin line because they're in an organization that tends to be controlling, tends to encourage reliance on the system. Okay, so anyway, the point is that even religion is in what I believe the carnal mind. Now, there's a famous philosopher called Descartes, and he said a very famous line. He said, "I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am." Now, if that is not a statement in the fallen nature, the carnal nature below the line, I don't know what is. That is a descriptive illustration of making your own brain into your God. Okay, the Bible calls it living from the knowledge of good and evil, so ye shall be gods unto yourself. Descartes called it, I think, therefore I am. In other words, what's that saying? What that's saying is if I didn't think, I wouldn't exist. And if you are a pure materialist, and if you're a materialist, by the way, just look up quantum physics debunks materialism. Just look that. So I know you're not interested in the religious stuff. If you're still listening, you may be mildly interested, or the spiritual stuff, I should say. But if you're more scientific minded, go on YouTube and look up quantum physics debunks materialism. This is the materialist idea. I think, therefore I am. Therefore, if I don't think, there's no I am. There is no me. Okay? And that concept is this fallen carnal nature. Now above the line, now below this line, I'm going to actually go to hopefully I put this in the right place when I edit this, but I'm going to suggest that to myself to go and edit in the laptop where I talk about levels of emotion. Okay, levels of emotion. Now it's just an illustration, so let's go over to that now. Hey there, this is Mark and I'm on my laptop now, and this is a really interesting chart. I found it online. There's actually I'll put the credit to the source of this image below so you can go and get it and look more into it. I believe this chart's being used differently to how I use it, but it's still essentially the same idea. Now what this is, it's kind of a levels of consciousness chart. You'll see there's a very thick line in the middle, and what that line represents to me is what I've talked about, or what I will talk about, is the carnal nature. It's the lower nature of man, the I think, therefore I am, or the living from the knowledge of good and evil mindset, where everything is physical, flesh, thoughts, and all that sort of stuff is all you know. If you look below the line, and I'll use my pointer here, if you can see this, below the line here, you'll see that it's all different, all the emotions which are pretty negative. Now, the idea of this chart is this is kind of a numerical level of consciousness. Okay. Now, what's very important for me to point out, if I haven't pointed out already, it's something that can't be repeated enough, is that your levels of consciousness is not the driver. The emotions is not the driver. It doesn't come first. You only think it comes first when you live from I think, therefore I am. But the truth is that your level of consciousness dictates your emotions. So and it's really a vicious cycle. So when you're in a lower state of consciousness, you can experience these emotions of pride, anger, desire, fear, guilt, apathy, shame, and all those sorts of emotions. Now, those emotions, or those energies, are a manifestation out of the level of consciousness that you're in, but they also keep you in that level of consciousness and feed that level of consciousness. Now, many people, for example, a person may think, well, I'm very prideful, I get angry all the time, I can't stop doing that. And then a religious person comes along and says, okay, you've got to stop being angry, that's bad, that's a sin. and they say, okay, I hear you, and then they try to stop being angry. Okay, I've got to stop being angry. I've got to stop being prideful, and they try, and they use their own will, their own effort, and their own carnal mind. They use the very mind that took on those behaviors to try and fix those behaviors. Well, it's kind of like going to a drug pusher to for lessons on how to get off drugs. It doesn't make sense. The mind is the part of you that's currently flawed in that way, so that you literally cannot stop being angry using willpower and mind games, because it's a low level of consciousness, and the only way to get rid of it, or to get above it, or to get to a place where you can be objective to it, is to raise your consciousness. That's the only way. So it's very important that you realize that all these emotions are a result of your level of consciousness, but they also feed and keep alive the level of consciousness. So there is a certain level of resisting being angry, but it's the way you do it that's important. If you use the mind and the willpower to stop doing it, then you're using the same level of consciousness that got you there to fix it. And it's very frustrating, and it never works. This is why in religion people get very frustrated. They're told not to sin, and they keep sinning. They can't stop sinning because they keep using the same level of consciousness to fix the sin that got them in the sin in the first place. It was a low level of consciousness that got them into that in the first place. So learn to raise your level of consciousness, which is on video 2 of this 2-part series on consciousness. Now you'll notice that once you get above the line, you start to move into courage, neutrality. Now when you're observing, when you see, here's the thing, is you can skip straight into a high level of consciousness just by getting into neutrality. And how you get into neutrality is, as I've taught on video 2, is to be objective and observant of things, therefore separating you from them, because to be the observer you have to be separate. Okay, go through both videos if you don't understand what I just said. I'm not sure where I'm going to edit this video in yet. So, and then once you slowly give up the pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, and all those sorts of things, as they're slowly diminished, things that exist above the line, willingness, acceptance, love, joy, peace, enlightenment, right at the top. Now Jesus would have been at the top and above. Okay, shame is the lowest. You can see shame is the lowest of levels of consciousness. And what does religion do to you very often? Guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame. It's really the lowest level of consciousness that religion tries to hold you in. And it never ends. You get angry, you get prideful, you have a lustful desire, you foul, you sin. They tell you shouldn't sin, you're a bad person, you're going to go to hell. Here we are back at the bottom. Shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt. Then it comes up again. Pride, anger, desire, pride, anger, desire. Fear. Apathy. Grief. Now grief, that's not referring to losing someone. That's referring to your attitude towards your life. And then a religious person tells you, you sinned, you're a bad person. Feel bad about yourself. That's the only way God is going to forgive you, if you go feel bad about yourself. There you are, back in guilt, shame, guilt and shame again. Low level of consciousness. Never ending. Religion, the world, just keeps circling around and round and around. The only way out of this, the only way out of the knowledge of good and evil way of living, the I think, therefore I am, carnal level of living, is to learn to raise your consciousness. And I talk about that in video 2. Okay, that's it. This is this chart, just to give you an idea. Key points. Remember, that your level of consciousness manifests these things, and these things manifest your level of consciousness. It's a loop. But the only way out is to become objective and step above the line. That's it. Thanks for listening. Okay, so hopefully you found that interesting, and welcome back. So looking at that chart, you see that it talks about different emotions. Now, you could think, well, in the lower level of consciousness, there's anger and there's guilt. And anger's higher than guilt. Well, anger, even though it's below the line, it's a low level of consciousness, it's part of that package. Someone who's living from guilt tends to be in a lower level of consciousness than someone who lives from anger, typically. Because someone who's typically angry is usually quite aware, and that's why they're angry, because they can see what's going on, they can see what's wrong. And that really describes a lot of people, I believe, that end up in mental institutions. They can see the insanity, but they don't know how to deal with it. They get angry. They don't know how to rise above it. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. This is my explanation of consciousness. And I encourage you, if you don't understand anything on this video, please, please, please comment below the video. Let's get a conversation going, because I really want this to be clear, okay? Or you can connect with me on Facebook. You can find me under Mark Rayner, Mark of the Tribe. I call myself Mark of the Tribe Rayner. That's my address, or Mark Rayner. You can find me Mark Rayner, R-A-Y-N-E-R, on Facebook. And yeah, so comment on the video, connect with me on Facebook. But what you can really do, it really helps, is please subscribe to this channel. Please like the video as well, and please hit the little bell notification on the video. This is something you can do to help, which is completely free. If you like my message and you want to help me spread and help more people, which is why I'm doing this, then simply subscribing is free, hitting the bell notification is free, liking the video and commenting, they're all free. But they actually make the video rank higher, and that really helps, because then more people see the video. Okay, thanks then, and I'll see you in video number 2, where I'm going to give you some techniques and methods to raise your level of consciousness. Thanks for listening.